Good morning. I'm Andrea Lewis, Director of Programs at Maryland Humanities, and we have some housekeeping items that we're going to take care of first. We want to let you know that this event is being recorded for further viewing purposes. You'll be able to view this event on the Maryland Humanities YouTube channel after the author tour has completed a little later this week. If you have questions for Ross Gay, please use the Q&A function, which is located at the bottom of your screen. If you happen to be on an iPad or a tablet, if you tap the screen so that the control buttons show up for you, you should see the Q&A function there. With the Q&A function, you're able to view the questions that other attendees have asked. And if you want to ask a question someone else has already put in the Q&A, you're going to click the thumbs up under that question to upvote it. And this will let the moderator know which questions are of the most interest to the audience during the Q&A we'll have later in the program. We have an ASL interpreter with us today. Thank you, Kenya. And you'll see that captions are enabled. The captions are at the bottom of the screen. If you find the captions distracting, click the button that says CC for closed captioning. And if you don't see the CC button, click on more, check under more, and you should be able to turn them off. We're excited you could join us this morning. This event is one of more than 300 programs being held this fall as part of our One Maryland, One Book program, which we like to think of as Maryland's biggest book club. Since the beginning of One Maryland, One Book 14 years ago, the authors of our selected books have spoken at various locations across the state. That was not possible this year given the ongoing pandemic and our wish to err on the side of caution by not holding large indoor events at this time. We're proud to be able to bring the One Maryland, One Book author tour to you virtually, so we can all still gather to hear Ross Gay speak. The level of enthusiasm for his collection of essays, The Book of Delights, highlights our collective interest in coming together during challenging times with the hope of connecting through our own experiences and the experiences of others. High school classes, book clubs, public libraries, senior centers, correctional facilities, and more have been participating in events inspired by the book across Maryland since September and plan to join us for more discussions and events this month and into November. At Maryland Humanities, we're passionate about making the humanities part of everyday life. Programs like this one use the humanities to explore our ideas, our stories, and our values, to foster understanding among people with diverse perspectives, and to strengthen our ability to interact meaningfully. I invite you to take a moment to learn more about our 9 other programs by visiting mdhumanities.org. And if you enjoy your time with us this morning, I hope that you will consider clicking on the donate button at the top of our website homepage when you visit. We're an educational nonprofit, and it is people like you and your generosity that allows us to thrive and continue to offer over 1,000 free programs statewide annually. I want to take a brief moment to thank our co-hosts and partners, St. Mary's County Library. Additional support was provided by Calvert Library, Charles County Public Library, Southern Maryland Regional Library, and Curious Iguana Bookstore. The staff of the libraries in St. Mary's, Calvert, and Charles counties, and the Southern Maryland Regional Library have put great effort into this morning's event. Special thanks to Laura Boone-Chasery, who worked closely with our staff. And now I would like to introduce our moderator, Michael Blackwell, Director of St. Mary's County Library, and our guest for today, Ross Gay.
Good morning, everyone.
Before working in libraries, Michael was a college English teacher and has a lifelong love of reading and literary analysis. He's the chair of the ALA Public Library Architecture and eBook Interest Groups and is a member of the Intellectual Freedom Roundtable. He has frequently presented and published on library architecture and digital content issues and been a strong advocate for the right to read and diversity in libraries. And I do want to add, if any of you out there are avid readers of ebooks, Michael has been working very hard in recent years to help ensure that libraries have access to the ebooks that you are interested in reading. It's very, very important work for readers across the country. Ross Gay is the author of the Book of Delights, a genre-defying book of essays and 4 books of poetry, including his most recent, Beholding, a love song to legendary basketball player Julius Erving, known as Dr. J, who dominated courts in the 1970s and 80s as a small forward for the Philadelphia 76ers. Gay is a founding editor with Carissa Chen and Patrick Rosal of the online sports magazine, Some Call It Ballin', a founding board member of the Bloomington Community Orchard, a nonprofit Free Fruit for All Food Justice and Joy project. Gay has received fellowships from Cave Canem, the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Guggenheim Foundation. He teaches at Indiana University. In the Book of Delights, Gay offers up a volume of lyric essays written over one tumultuous year. The first nonfiction book from the award-winning poet is a record of the small joys we often overlook in our busy lives. Among Gay's funny, poetic, philosophical delights are a friend's unabashed use of air quotes, cradling a tomato seedling aboard an airplane, the silent nod of acknowledgement between the only 2 Black people in a room. But Gay never dismisses the complexities, even the terrors of living in America as a Black man, or the ecological and psychic violence of our consumer culture or the loss of those he loves. More than any other subject, though, Gay celebrates the beauty of the natural world, his garden, the flowers peeking out of the sidewalk, the hypnotic movements of a praying mantis. So I'd like to ask you to please join me in welcoming Ross Gay.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here again. Yeah, so this is like day 2 of the tour, and it's great. It feels like we're getting grooving now. Yeah, I'm just really glad to be here. I'm gonna, one of the things I'm excited about is, because Michael is, this is a library reading, and I love libraries, go figure. And I haven't always loved libraries because I didn't always love books. But now I love libraries and all kinds of libraries. And I just thought, a library shows up in this one. So this is called Fishing an Eyelash. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this book, it was written from August 1st, 2016 to August 1st, 2017. And there was just a day, maybe 2 weeks before August 1st, maybe a month before, when I was walking, having a very nice time. And I thought I was having what I decided was a delightful moment. I was in a delightful moment. And then I thought, oh, let me write a little essay about this moment of delight. And then a bird flew in my head. This is what it felt like. I don't know if it felt like a bird, but something said, do it for a year. Write about an essay about something that delights you every day for a year. So that's what this book is. So all the titles they have that kind of quality, kind of diaristic quality. And they're all dated. And so this one is called Fishing an Eyelash, 2 or 3 cents on the virtues of the poetry reading. It might be a kind of self-aggrandizement to say so, but I love poetry readings. I love going to them. I think I probably love them most often more than I love poetry books. I'm pretty sure this is true. The reason is simple. Because during a poetry reading, you are watching someone communicate with their body, which is as it communicates in the process of fading away. It will, perhaps one day soon, be dead. I mean, it sounds necrophilic, I know, but it's not exactly. Because the fact of the dying, which too you and I will do, and which books will not, reminds us that the performing body, the reading body, the living body, the body fiddling with the reading lamp on the podium, or playing with the hem of her dress, or keeping beat on the microphone like Whitney Houston used to, looking into the corners of the room, the occasional sparkling line of spit between his lips, the armpit of their t-shirt damp, pointing to the giraffe in their poem, all of it is lustrous. Books are lovely. I love books. And libraries are among my favorite places on earth, especially the tiny hand-built take one, leave ones like book birdhouses popping up in the last 5 or 10 years. That's a delight. And the libraries in small towns that only open 2.5 days a week and odd hours at that, where the knotty pine boards creak and the book-stuffed shelves of the old house wobble as you pass through, where you have to duck, walking beneath the sagging doorframe into the sci-fi, gardening, erotica, and children's lit room. As I write this, it's occurring to me that the books I most adore are the ones that archive the people who have handled them. Dog ears or old receipts used as bookmarks, always a lovely digression. Underlines and exclamation points, and this in an old library book. The tender vandalisms by which sometimes we express our love. Or a fingerprint made of some kind of oil, maybe from peanut butter, which it would be if it was mine. Or a tea stain, and a note to oneself only oneself could decipher. But books do not, the way the poet did today, cough and excuse herself and sip some water and comment on the pollen, sending you into a lilac-inspired daydream, wiping your own nose on your sleeve. Books do not look searchingly while communicating their contents at the 12 or 13 people gathered on couches in what must have been one of the most passive-aggressively lit rooms in America. Books do not, mid-poem, reach the forefinger and thumb into one's mouth to gently fish out an eyelash. There are multiplicities within a human body reading poems that a poem on a page will never reproduce. In other words, books don't die, and preferring them to people won't prevent our doing so. And this one is called Reading Poems, like poems. This one, I never know if this one works. Like these essays, a lot of times I read them, and a lot of times there's 102 essays in this book. And so I have the good fortune of having essays that I don't read very often just because they stay new to me. But I don't read this one often because to me, it's funny. A lot of stuff is funny to me, but it's not funny to other people. Anyway, let's see. This is called Reading Poems. As I was passing through airport security this morning, the young man at the giant X-ray machine waving me through made an appropriately appreciative observation of my socks and the person's socks before mine. And using my detective skills here, I determined probably lots of people's socks throughout his shift. Anyhow, to me, he said about the flower design of my socks, "You have roses on your feet," before turning back to his screen to see if and where he had to pat me down. His banter, which he kept up like a mantra, "Roses on your feet, roses on your socks," betrayed his shyness when I looked over my shoulder to see the groin region on my video game likeness lit up. He walked me over to what was supposed to be a room, and was, though it was a room made of clear plexiglass with no discernible obstruction of sight, by which I mean privacy, which the forthcoming search, puritanically speaking, might have longed for. The plexiglass room, a short walk from the pat-down holding pen just outside the spaceship X-ray room, actually exacerbated the publicness of what would be my not quite hand job. He offered stammeringly, non-committally, without a hint of eye contact, his obligation, which was an odd kind of consent. I am consenting to feel you up with the backs of my gloved hands, which he held up to me, both of them, all the way up the inside of your inseam, he said, palms facing himself, as though to reify the friendly distance, the pure utility of the massage. As he was feeling me up, he asked me where I was going. I told him I was going to go read poems in Syracuse, which made him look up from his work, which he was kneeling to do. And he said enthusiastically, if a little bit quizzically, "You must be good at it if they fly you around to do it." I was feeling good about myself as we finished. I guess he finished and walked me toward the hand swiping wand, rubbing it along my palms and plugging it into the machine they say detects explosives, but obviously collects DNA for future cloning. He then told me about his mother taking him to have his poems read, which made us even closer than we already were. He was talking about longer lines and shorter ones and some broken ones, all of which, admittedly, I was distracted from, given as I was cutting it close, checking my watch and listening for the boarding call. I never believed it in myself, but I know some people do, he said, dismissing me at last. And I laughed and nodded, overhearing him saying to one of his colleagues as I jogged toward my gate, "Hey, Mike, that guy's being flown to Syracuse to read poems." Okay. This one is called Sharing a Bag. Sharing a bag. I adore it when I see two people. Today it was, from the looks of it, a mother and child here on Canal Street in Chinatown, sharing the burden of a shopping bag or sack of laundry by each gripping one of the handles. It at first seems to encourage a kind of staggering, as the uninitiated or the impatient will try to walk at his own pace, the bag twisting this way and that, whacking shins or skidding along the ground. But as we mostly do, feeling the sack, which has become a kind of tether between us, we modulate our pace, even our sway and saunter, the good and soul rhythms we might swear we live by, to the one on the other side of the sack. I suppose part of why I so adore the sack sharing is because most often this is a burden one or the other could manage just fine solo, which makes it different from dragging Granny's armoire up 2 flights of steps, say, or wrestling free a truck stuck hip deep in a snowbank. Yes, it's the lack of necessity of this act that's perhaps precisely why it delights me so. Everything that needs doing, getting the groceries or laundry home, would get done just fine without this meager collaboration. But the only thing that needs doing without it would not. I think I'm going to read probably about 3 more, and then we can talk a little bit. This is called Umbrella in the Cafe. You know, it's funny, as I'm reading these two, I'm realizing part of the pleasure of reading these when I can look at the dates and kind of remember, oh, that's right, November 28th, I was on my way to a reading at Rutgers, you know, that kind of thing. It's kind of fun. Umbrella in the Cafe. I'm on my way to New Brunswick for a reading and decided to stop in Jersey City at a bakery on Jersey Avenue called Chaco Pain, with croissants and quiche that smelled so good as I walked in this morning, I closed my eyes and reached out like I was falling. This place is kitty cornered to a place called Nicole's, a West Indian joint where they have the best roti I have ever eaten. And when I stopped in yesterday on my way into New York to get one, the owner, Nicole, said to me, "I was just thinking about you on Sunday." Had she not added Sunday, the cynic in me might have thought she was just being a good business person. But that Sunday made it precise and kind of holy. Like maybe she was praying for me. And however it was, I flitted through Nicole's mind, a little butterfly, a little flutterby, delights me, given the cancer she has been afflicted with these past several years. How beautiful and dark she looked, like maybe she'd gone home for a few weeks. I wondered. In the bakery, let me interrupt myself to acknowledge how often thus far in my journey of delight, a food or food type establishment and experience is the occasion of a delight, that it might form a kind of atlas or map of delights, which is a very good idea for a book, perhaps a companion book to this one, The Map of Delights. I was sitting here reading C.D. Wright's last book, which I love and mourn its being the last one, forever the last one. And where I am sitting in the cafe, with my legs crossed, I am long-leggedly tall, and sometimes it's a puzzle where to put my legs. My right foot, in a now very large seeming red sneaker, is in the path of every person who walks in the door and out the door, which makes for a lanky and regular semi-distraction from the page. The proximity, the negotiation, the closeness also means many contacts, again and again, as I bob my big red foot down, but briefly, so as not to catch a cramp in my hamstrings or calf, which would be dangerous. A guy on his way out, after buying his Americano and scooting by my big red bobbing foot and smiling softly at me and me at him, looked at the drizzle through the big plate glass window, put his coffee down, opened his umbrella, put it up over his head, picked up his coffee, then realized, I presume, that he was still inside this bakery. The window was very clean. I saw him giggle to himself, realizing, I think, what he had done. Let me interrupt again to mention that a man with a sack of some sort slung over his shoulder just entered Chacopan and exclaimed, "Good morning, Jersey City family." And so the man lowered his umbrella and walked quickly out, with a smirk that today I read as a smirk of gentleness, of self-forgiveness. Do you ever think of yourself late to your meeting, or peed your pants some, or sent the private email to the group, or burned the soup, or ordered your cortado with your fly down, or snot on your face, or opened your umbrella in the bakery as the cutest little thing? This is a good one. This is called Beast Mode. This is at this hotel I used to stay at down on 8th Street, which incidentally is right next to, across the street and down the way from this great stationery store. Okay, Beast Mode. This morning, checking out of the hotel on 8th Street between 5th and 6th, one of the bellhops who has become my friend, who I hugged never less than 3 times upon our reunions, and is right now applying to grad school in acting. When I asked about his auditions and what kinds of monologues he was preparing, regaled me with the most stunning and delightful rendition of the Lady Macbeth monologue, chiding her husband to take care of business. It was the best version I'd ever heard, truly, though he did it kind of quick because he was actually on the clock, and we were standing in the lobby, one of the other attendants looking furtively at us. When I asked why he chose that monologue for his auditions, he gave me a mini lecture on ambition, getting things done, having vision. And he told me too, that's what he was looking for in a partner, someone who's all in, who can go beast mode. I said, yeah, I get that, but dashing the baby's head against the wall is maybe a little much. He said, yeah, that's too much. Then we hugged. All right, let me do 2 more. This is called Weirdly Untitled. Weirdly Untitled. Yesterday, I read poems at the Abraham Heschel School on 60th Street to a group of 70 or so fairly attentive 11th graders. Some were very attentive, budding poets that they were, hanging around to chat with me after the reading. One kid was even so bold as to stick around after the rest of his crew had dispersed to quietly ask, "Do you ever write stoned?" Though I don't, I in no way discouraged the child from indulging, which I worried about for a few seconds as I was leaving the school, walking down 60th Street toward Columbus Circle in a windstorm, hoping I didn't condemn that child to a life of sorrow. My favorite of the stragglers, go figure, was the light-skinned, fluffy Afroed child with an African medallion, straight out of a multi-culti Tribe Called Quest video. Better yet, straight out of a Jungle Brothers or a De La Soul video. That's it. He was so De La. He also had a Black Panthers pin above his heart on his sweatshirt. He could have been me in 1989 with my Ethiopia pin affixed to my collar, which in Levittown, Pennsylvania, was as much a fly in the buttermilk move as this child's here at Heschel's school. Not so much, given as Heschel marched with King, given as we were in Manhattan, given the long, if complicated, political companionship between Blacks and Jews. And Levittown was built as an exclusionary community, a segregated community about 20 miles north of Philadelphia, conceived of almost in anticipation of Brown v. Board of Education, the inauguration of an era of great racist innovation, turns out. My brother's first house in Lemoyne, Pennsylvania, had a clause in the title that prohibited it from being sold to a colored person, which he is. Indulge the anachronism. It was in the title. And he seemed to enjoy at least a touch the soiling, the filthing his body in that space was. The filthing, the squadron of filth he calls his family is. Actually, he barely mentioned it. I enjoyed the filthing. I trust you understand with my word choice, I am deploying a kind of harsh irony, which works, if it works, because you discern a proximity to a true sentiment, a familiarity with a true sentiment. The sentiment my mother's grandmother, my family, expressed by wiping her hand on her apron after shaking reluctantly my father's hand, which is by now a cliche based on truth. A truth that occurred, among other places, in Verndale, Minnesota in 1971. As my mother gets older, and in moments of openness, she has begun sharing more of her early life with my father, the family stuff, that this apartment is no longer available stuff, that you have doomed your children, they will be fucked in the head stuff. It is no special doom they have inflicted upon us, turns out. Neither is our head fuck especially special. The other night, I was driving my mother home from the movie Loving, about the story behind the Supreme Court case that banned the ban on interracial marriage, which my mom kind of loved, and I kind of didn't. That came out wrong. I love the ban, or I love the ban of the ban. The Supreme Court ruling, I love it. I just thought the movie was a two-dimensional reinscription of hetero boringness. She told me my dad, to whom she was married for about 35 years until he died, said to her early on, I might be making too much trouble for you. Maybe we shouldn't do this. But, you know, they did. Let me read one more real quick, short one. This one is called Planting Carrots. No, it's not. It's called Tomato on Board. Tomato on Board. What you don't know until you carry a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane is that carrying a tomato seedling through the airport and onto a plane will make people smile at you, almost like you're carrying a baby, a quiet baby. I did not know this until today, carrying my little tomato, about 3 or 4 inches high in its little 4-inch plastic starter pot, which my friend Michael gave to me, smirking about how I was going to get it home. Something about this at first felt naughty, not comparing a tomato to a baby, but carrying the tomato onto the plane. And so I slid the thing into my bag while I was going through security, which made them pull the bag for inspection. When the security guy saw it was a tomato, he smiled and said, I don't know how to check that. Have a good day. But I quickly realized that one of its stems, which I almost wrote as arms, was broken from the jostling, and it only had 4 of them. So I decided I better just carry it out in the open. And the shower of love began. It was a shower of love I also felt while carrying a bouquet of lilies through the streets of Rome last summer. People, maybe women especially, maybe women my age-ish and older especially, smiling with approval. A woman in a house dress beating out a rug on a balcony shouted at me, "Bravo!" An older couple holding hands both smiled at me and pulled into each other, knitting their fingers together. My showerers might have been disappointed to know I was not giving the lilies to a sweetheart, but to my friends Damiano and Moira, who had translated a few of my poems into Italian and were so kind as to let me stay at their place a couple nights while I was passing through. On the way to the vegetarian restaurant Damiano's ex-wife owns with her partner, we walked by what I'm pretty sure he said was the biggest redbud tree in the world. It stretched for yards, lounging periodically onto the mossy earth. Its beautiful black bark glistened by the streetlights. Though translation is an act of love, so my showers needn't be disappointed at all. Before boarding the final leg of my flight, one of the workers said, "Nice tomato," which I don't think was a come on. And the flight attendant asked about the tomato at least 5 times, not an exaggeration, every time calling it my tomato. "Where's my tomato? How's my tomato? You didn't lose my tomato, did you?" She even directed me to an open seat in the exit row. "Why don't you guys go sit there and stretch out?" I gathered my things and set the little guy in the window seat so she could look out. When I got my water, I poured some into the little guy's soil. When we got bumpy, I put my hand on the little guy's container, careful not to snap another arm off. And when we landed and the pilot put the brakes on hard, my arm reflexively went across the seat, holding the little guy in place, the way my dad's arm would when we had to brake hard in that car without seatbelts to speak of, in one of my very favorite gestures in the Encyclopedia of Human Gestures. Thank you.
Well, Ross, I almost hate to interrupt because we're enjoying your reading so very much. Thank you. And if we had a live audience, you'd be getting a lot of applause. Incidentally, to judge from the chat, the story about reading palms works brilliantly.
Okay.
Everybody loves that one. So if you want to keep going with that one, I think you've got a winner on your hands. We've got quite a few really good questions already, and I want to get to all those. But before I do, first of all, Kenya, for you, Laura Rocco, rather than questioning, comments and says, "Your signing is also a delight. Choreography with her hands."
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your work making this happen for everybody. Okay, Ross, just a couple of questions for you. And some of the questions from the audience are already anticipating what some of the things I'm asking about. But the first one's kind of about your writing process. So in these essays, the writing seems to capture the thoughts even as they're occurring to you. The sentences almost seem to be in search of insights. You just had a quote about the butterfly and flutterby. It seems to be capturing consciousness, and those commas and really short clauses create that effect. Yet these essays are also incredibly polished and very well constructed. So tell us a bit about your writing process. For all we know, you could be working these over and over again until they're just right. In these essays, is that sort of how you wrote them as they occurred to you, or do you do any rewriting? And how does it compare to the poetry that you write in terms of your style?
Yeah, great question. You know, the first thing is that I gave when I decided to write this book, I gave myself 3 constraints. And the constraints were that I had to write an essay every day. I had to write them by hand, and I had to write them within 30 minutes. They had to be drafted in 30 minutes. So there's a kind of, I'm not a quick writer, actually, or prior to this anyway, I was sort of a slow writer because I'd only written poems, and my relationship to writing poems it's actually sort of just automatically slower. Like, if I were to sort of give myself the task of writing, I should say it like this. I would never give myself the task of writing a poem a day. I just wouldn't do that, certainly not for a year. And there's some kind of like, I don't know if this is totally accurate, or I don't know exactly how to think about it, but one of the ways that I think about it is that there's some realm of access that requires a kind of pace and slowness that the poems would not permit me to be like, yeah, do it every day, like you're going to do it every day. You're going to do a finished thing. You're going to do a draft of something every day. Now, maybe, in a year I'll decide, well, let's try to do that. And then that'll change. But at this moment, that's sort of how it feels. But with these essays, it sort of started a way where now I can kind of do that. But the 30 minutes for a session required me to, I have a question. Am I experiencing this feeling of delight when I see two people carrying a bag together? And then the objective then became, I got to wonder about this. And maybe in the wondering, know something different, not an answer or anything, but just know something different or have something illuminated in the 30 minutes, which if you have that kind of clock going, it permits you or maybe encourages you or forces you almost to have different relationships to the sentence, to meaning making, to grammar, to syntax, because you're trying to get to something. You're trying to get to some new light. So that's one thing. So that however the question was phrased, the sort of thing of like recording things as they come out of my head, there's something really accurate about that. And that would be the time constraint that I think allowed that to happen. The other thing, the second part of it, is that I revise like crazy, So as things come out of your head, my head, I'll say, they come out like, brrr, And so part of what I'm trying to do is, after I let them sit for a while, because I don't want to impose my sort of systems or of understanding of how I think an essay should be on the thing before I understand it. But I revised them so that they more accurately, not more accurately, so that they really beautifully, try to capture that kind of fleet thinking that's going on, So it's a way of trying to revise toward your voice, so that, the idea even of a voice or the idea of a kind of like interior thing, there's the idea of it. There is the real thing, which is kind of incoherent and incomprehensible. But then the conveyance of it or the sharing of it, that's the kind of thing that the revision is toward. How do I make this exactly like that idea?
Well, thank you. And you succeeded kind of brilliantly in making it look like it was just tossed off. That was what you thought right there. And yet the structure is so brilliant that they always come to a point that makes your audience think. My next question is actually one that has also been asked by one of the audience members, Jean. And as I phrased it, it's you're writing a book of delights, and yet sadness and even death enter these essays. Does what you call existential sadness exist close to joy for you? The one seeming to summon the other. And Jean said that quite a few of the different delights contain elements that are very sad or even tragic, such as the friend who was murdered soon after moving to his new home. Do you believe that without the pains of life, that life's delights cannot be as deep or meaningful? So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think for sure. That's one of my main questions. I'm actually writing a book that's sort of more explicitly trying to wonder about this idea of joy right now. But yeah, as of now, I'm sort of deeply, or I kind of am, I don't know if convinced is the word, but I'm really interested in the idea that this thing we call joy is, to some real true extent, the ways that we hold each other in the midst of our sorrows and through our sorrows, and that the joy is actually the sort of, what is radiant in the tethers that exist between us as we care for each other through our sorrows. Care for each other in ways we may or may not know too. And that's sort of the thing. I've been like in my head thinking a lot lately of that from Waiting for Godot that I can't remember, it's like a late speech by one of the two main characters, but they say born astride a grave, you know. And so just the thing of like, yes, we all are. And when that sort of awareness is sort of arrives, then how do we sort of like be with each other in the midst of that, you know, be with each other, love each other through that, care for each other through that, as we all sort of experience it in various ways. And the other sorrow, all the other sorrows or the changes, you know, that too. So that's a long way of saying, I feel like sorrow and joy are not only do they inform each other, I feel like they are, like, I don't think joy is a thing absent sorrow, you know.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of questions coming in. I had a bunch of questions. I want to do one more of mine because I wore a purple shirt in honor of one of your pieces.
Cornet to Spring.
Yes, exactly. And I love that. And speaking of, you know, so cornet is the official sort of, you know, blare that they make to do royal announcements, and purple is the royal color. That was a brilliant piece, the purple cornets of spring. One orthodoxy you challenge in a number of these essays is the idea of masculinity. In the essay about the purple scarf, you say you wouldn't have worn it a few years back, but now you try to allow yourself to be, and I hope this is the right word, pretty. Has that been a struggle for you? And why is it important to challenge that older idea of masculinity for you?
I mean, you know, like I grew up in a certain kind of idea with a certain kind of idea of masculinity, or what a male or what a man is. And you know, like I say in that one essay about the purple infinity scarf that my friend Danny knitted for me, it's a I call it a garden of rocks and a garden of prostate woe. And basically meaning that it's doom. It's a horror show. You know, the ways that so often, and I'll say from my experience, the ways so often I was taught and trained up to be what they call a man meant other things like, you know, among other things, suppressing your sorrow, for instance, you know, suppressing your heartbreak, not acknowledging your heartbreak, not to mention not acknowledging, you know, your physical frailties, you know, the bodily frailties, you know. I think, you know, I played college football, and I always like to remember this. I played college football, and I got a scholarship, you know, so I basically got a scholarship to play by playing football. I got a scholarship to college by playing football, which means I paid for my college with playing football, which means I paid for my higher education by giving myself brain damage and never saying a word about it. You know, and if you were to be like, you know, the whole training is to not try to inflict pain on these other men. And it's also to endure pain in your own body, you know, and the endurance of pain in your own body is also the endurance of pain, you know, and the suppression of pain in your own spirit and your own psyche. So all of which to me feels like, you know, part of the great and horrible mythology of what it means to be this thing they call a man, which is so, that version is so, I just am so glad. Every day I'm practicing letting that go, you know, which, you know, is like so deeply embedded that it's a practice every day. You know,
it's a long way from the gridiron to poetry, and I wanted to ask you how you became a writer, but I see these really great questions, so I'm going to skip to those, other than one really flippant one, and you don't have to answer this one. On pages 216 through 218, there's a piece called Name Katya. I hope I'm saying that right, Katya Young. Phone number 555-867-5309. Were you trying to give me that earworm? Were you really going to do that to me?
Oh, yeah.
I sat there singing Tommy Two-Tone for the rest of the day. Okay, so here's a question from our audience. Carolyn asked, your backdrop is fascinating, especially the flag with the flower creation. What's the story? Is there an essay or a poem about that flag?
Oh, no, but that is from a class that the story is the best story ever. I'm going to tell you. I was teaching a class in this room. This is about 3-4 years ago. And it was like a graduate poetry, whatever, workout. I call it a workout, not a workshop, but a workout. And we did it in here. And this is like a studio that we share, some folks share, but there's like letterpresses and there's lots of books on the other side of the wall. And but one day we had to go on campus into a regular classroom, which when you've not been in the regular classroom and you sort of like have the opportunity to have like, our class was in the evening. So we did it through the fall, through the winter, and the light changed and all of this like real kind of in life in a certain kind of way. And then we had to go to campus for some reason. And it just felt so sad to be on campus. So that we did a little thing, we did a little ceremony, like a ritual. And we were like, let's just write blessings real quick to bless this room we have to be in. I brought strips of paper and we all did these little blessings and hung them in the doorway. And then we went back out the door and came back through the door so that we could bless this room. And one of the students in the class, Alberto is his name, was, he snagged all these blessings. He pulled them off the door as we left that day. And I didn't know, I just thought he was cleaning up because I would have left them up forever, and annoyed whoever was behind me. But he made this flag. So it's a flag of blessings from that class. It's a flag of blessings from that class. So, like I said, 3 or 4 years ago, but as long as I live, if it's possible, I'm going to keep that flag. Yeah.
Oh, great. Thank you. Robin asks, do you ever regret any of the depth of your sharing in this book? She says, I feel like we are friends and I suspect you inspire that in many readers. It could get crowded.
It's true. It's totally true. I walked into the coffee shop like shortly after this book came out, maybe, I don't know, 6 months after this book came out. And I saw a friend who's not like a close friend, but like an acquaintance. So we see each other around. And she looked at me like she didn't recognize me. And I was like, Emily, it's me, it's for us. And then she was like, I feel like I've kind of been with you, like really with you for the last year, and because she had just read the book. So I understand that feeling. And yeah, I think I probably encourage it to some extent. I mean, I know that the essays encourage it for sure. I don't have the feeling. I mean, there's feelings of discomfort, of course. Like there are certain essays that I pray, that certain people will never read. My mother.
The one about your mother that had Hillary Clinton in it, maybe not. Yeah. Maybe
I know. Look, we cut it out of the book. My mom is not like the kind of person who's like been to therapy, who would be like, oh, who cares? But my mother would be like, okay, you're never coming over again. But anyway, so yeah, that kind of thing. But for the most part, as a general rule to the general reader, nah. And and there are things that I won't talk about, and so those things I wouldn't put in the book. But everything that I put in the book, I feel like the discomfort that it provokes, I sort of enjoy, I sort of enjoy.
Lisa May asks a question that I can answer for you. She says, wouldn't it be fantastic to have an audiobook of Ross Gay reading these to re-listen to? And the answer is yes, you can. Yeah. You can get that through Hoopla at your library, but my suggestion is that if you go online, you can purchase a copy of this as an audiobook. And one of my questions was simply that you've read from your book and you've got such a great way of reading it. And Lisa, I certainly agree. Wouldn't it be fantastic? And it's great that it is. But I wanted to ask you something related to that. And that is that you've probably read some of your favorite pieces. Are there any that you read and just say, what was I why did I write that, or what am I thinking? So that maybe you're a writer who is always looking forward, is never quite satisfied, or are there some that you just say, that's really good?
I think I think they're all really good, you know. Sometimes I'm like, maybe I just, but like I said with the poems one, sometimes I'm like, but I don't know if this is good to anyone else. You know? Like I definitely had that feeling, but this is really interesting thing about being a writer, you know, or being an artist or being whatever, I guess. You know, and I will say like, in my relationships, I am at every step, you know, not every step, often being like, what the hell was I doing? You know, what the hell was I thinking? Or that is like a common feature of my life as a person in relationship. When I'm writing things, by the time I'm sort of sharing them, I'm not like, you know, oh, this is pretty good. I'm like, I'm really interested in this. I'm really interested in this, and I'm taken by it, and I want to read it, you know. And part of my revision process is actually making these things that at first maybe I'm kind of like, oh, that's pretty good. Like there's a kernel in there or whatever. The revision process is the time and the place and the way by which I make the things into things that I'm like, oh, these are very interesting to me. These, and I know now that these are things that will remain compelling to me, and they will still crack me up, and they will still make me remember something, and they will, you know, they will trouble my, they will remind me of something that I've learned, you know, so that, and I sort of, I don't know how to say that. Like I know I've worked with younger writers who, and I think this is actually a common experience. People say this, I've heard this said, and I now don't relate to it. The idea of like, you write a book and you kind of, you're done with it, and then you're done with it, and you aren't interested in it, and you maybe even hate it. That's not my experience. And I don't quite know what would actually provoke that as an experience. Unless you are not, I don't know, you know, I don't know, like maybe if it feels like you've kind of mastered the thing, but you know, mastery is never my aspiration. You know, my aspiration is to make deeper and make more luminous what is already curious to me. You know, I want my curiosity to be the sort of engine of my inquiry, and not my mastery, not my knowledge, you know. And so the things that I finish, I think by the time I finish them, I have imbued them with enough of my sort of like deepest curiosity that they're not going to fade away, or not going to become like, ugh. You know, I think they're just going to be like records of thinking, records of hard thinking, you know what I mean? And that doesn't get uninteresting to me.
Oh, Terry asks, I was so struck by your observation and found things about the impulse to share the sight of an inside airport bird with a neighbor who maybe was not even your neighbor until the bird flew. In reading the book, it seems like the daily practice of delight has sown deeper seeds of connection for you. How has this daily practice changed you? And are you still, to ask another question from the audience, are you still doing a writing on a fairly daily basis about joy?
Yeah, it's thanks for that question. I love that question. You nail it right away. Like that sort of practice of like, you know, that airport one was so good for me because I learned in the process, you know, I learned in the process of writing that thing of like, it was in the Detroit airport, and birds seem to always kind of be flying around in that airport, in this area where the fountains are. And there's a little illy coffee shop. And I remember that when I saw a bird one time, I noticed myself, like I was looking around for someone to be like, yo, did you see that bird? You know? And then I realized, oh, this book, I don't know if I say it in that essay, I don't think I do, but I realized, oh, this book is that. This book is several efforts of being like, yo, you see this? This is something I love. Do you see this? Like, that just brought me glee. Do you see this? You know, I want to share that with you. And to understand that is an almost one could be a practice, noting what delights you, and then being like, whoa, but not only a practice and not only a muscle that can be built, but maybe even, and I kind of think it's the case that for the most part, it's a little bit that we're inclined to do that. A little bit, it seems to me that we're inclined to do that. If you see a rainbow, or like, if you see like if you see a hot air balloon, it's, beautiful and it's crazy. And you're like, what the hell is that? It's not, I don't think it's actually our inclination not to be like, flummoxed with the thing in a solitary way, like if you're next to someone, I think it's a little bit our inclination to at the very least be like, yo, look at this beautiful thing. That's wild. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that I have that practice has so informed what I've been doing in the meantime. And like I said, I'm writing this book about joy. But I'm also, it's been 5 years. So I kind of decided, I'm going to write another one of these Book of Delights. And it started August 1st, again, on my birthday, just to see what happens. So I'm writing again, birthday to birthday. And it's interesting. It's interesting.
Well, changing focus just a little bit here. We in libraries think that publishers could do a lot better job reflecting diversity. Not every perspective, not every person seems to be able to be represented as well as some others. Has it been more difficult for you to become published as a Black writer, would you say?
I don't know if that's been my experience particularly. Though I witnessed the experience all the time, I witnessed that experience all the time. That there are all manner of sort of impediments to folks who are not like already sort of tied into the very specific grooves, being brought into the grooves, and you just see it like how profoundly white publishing is. Safe bet that folks are going to publish, white folks are going to publish white folks, and on and on and on, literary magazines and everything else. It's just like, so yeah, I mean, I see it all the time. And yeah, that's what it is. That's what it is.
In your work, you make allusion to the originator of the essay Montaigne, and you talk about Rilke. You say you love Virgil's Georgics. You make all kinds of references to a lot of more contemporary writers. You mentioned Jamaica Kincaid as the most good. Who are writers whose work you particularly admire? And conversely, are there any writers you felt you've had to kind of get over? They were such an influence on you that you didn't want to speak in their voice.
Great question. Great question. There are writers who, it's so neat. So I'm 47 years old. So, and I'm, like 5 books in, I guess, and moving. And I feel like I'm at a neat place of sort of thinking about what has been, what is, what will be, which I think is the title maybe of the architect Lou Kahn, maybe his collected writings or lectures. I just something like that. But anyway, I can see the I'm looking at my library actually, and I can see the ways that certain writers have sort of been such a guide for me. And some of those writers were a guide, and they sort of moved me along. And I have since been I've since kind of become like, okay, yeah, I'm less interested in that writer than I used to be. But they're in me, they help me know how to talk. And then there are writers who have been very interesting and really important to my sort of formation of my voice and stuff, who I forget have been foundational to me, and then they kind of reemerge, you know. And I think of writers like June Jordan is one, and there's John Edgar Weidemann is another writer who, you know, I was reading deeply in my 20s, and I forgot that the way I think of it, like I basically learned how to write a sentence from John Edgar Weidemann, which also means I learned how to think, you know, because how you write your sentences, you know, how you think and how you write your sentences are very much connected. But the older I get, the more I'm, or the less I'm, I mean, in Montaigne, you know, the Montaigne, the essays there, I'm glad you said that. I didn't know how to say it. All these.
Oh no, that's not just Montaigne. Yeah.
But anyway, those essays, boom, they kind of like were so instructive to me. They kind of infiltrated my notion of you know, the mind's movement in a short amount of time. And the older I get, the more I'm sort of like, that feels to me like the more voices in my voice, the more voices I'm able to sort of recognize and celebrate with my voice, and celebrate them by being like, yes, they're part of my voice. My voice is not a distinguished voice. My voice is a voice that is a kind of culmination, not a culmination, it's a gathering of voices. That makes me really just grateful, happy and grateful. And so sometimes when, boop, there comes my mother, sometimes, boop, you know, there comes Mary Baraka, boop, sometimes there comes Lucille Clifton, you know, and it feels lucky, feels really lucky.
So in one of the pieces, you talk about Thomas Jefferson, who's penning aphorisms about never being caught in bed by the dawn, and yet you point out that there he was enjoying the fruits of other people's labors, and those other people being the enslaved. Obviously, right now we're in a time of reinterpreting some of our history, and yet that more traditional view is being vehemently defended. How would you like us to read somebody like Jefferson in a modern context?
Oh, I don't know. You know, probably as like a one of these formative, you know, complicated, you know. I mean, basically what I would say is like together. I would like us to read him together, and with the depths of the deepest depths of complication, and the deepest depths of complication, and clarity, you know, that feels like the, and frankly, with an appropriate amount of heartbreak, you know, sorrow over the brutality, you know, sorrow over the brutality, by which, you know, the remains of which we are still in the midst of, and we will forever. And it feels to me that if we do not engage to some extent, to some profound extent, in the sorrow, you know, we're condemned to sort of, you know, I mean, we're condemned one way or another, but what we're condemned to, I think, is maybe it can be different, you know. And it feels to me like engaging the sorrow, being willing to, and just to resides to some extent in the sorrow, feels necessary. I know that.
Well, thank you. That was not an easy question, and I think that you answered it very, very well. So we'll go slightly lighter here, but not back to Tommy Two-Tone. So Voltaire's Candide ends after many adventures, most of them painful, with the line, "But we must tend to our garden." Gardening, my wife makes me do a lot of gardening. I'm always happy to have done it rather than I'm doing it right there. Gardening is obviously extremely important to you. What makes it such a delight for you?
Oh, it's endless. It's endless. I mean, for one, I like, to grow the food, a lot of the food that, I eat. That itself is just kind of, it's mysterious, but it's also just every aspect of it is entangled. So, but it's just like, it's incredible to put a clove of garlic in the ground in, whatever, Halloween, and then by like June 1st or whatever, the next year, to have a head of garlic. That blows my mind. It does not stop blowing my mind. Or to put a potato or a piece of a potato in the ground, and then 3 months later to have like, 8 potatoes or whatever. That just, I'm never going to get over that. So there's that. And then, like the sort of like very practical thing of like what you grow, you can kind of like keep track of, and you can kind of like, if you're eating your own stuff and you're taking care of your soil and you're trying to love the land where you are and be with it and study it and, listen, then, you're going to be, the food's going to try to take care of you too. I think that's another thing. But then in terms of like, maybe 2 things I could say 1,000 things, but 2 things. One is that the garden to me is a place where I have a different relationship to time. And it's a different relationship to time. In part, it feels like a lyric relationship to time. So even when I think about these essays, how sometimes, boom, they drop out of time and they just get into a parenthetical for like, a paragraph or more, or they whine. That's in a way like the map of my moving through a garden is not unlike the map of my moving through an essay or something. And partly because, like the garden is like, you walk and I'm like, okay, I got to go out there and grab some mint for this smoothie I'm finishing. And then I see like there's a gigantic bumblebee on the Tithonia that I got to look at. It's a bumblebee the size of like a VW bug or something. So I got to go over there. And then when I'm over there, I'm like, oh, okay. So the sorrel is looking real fat and hearty. Let me eat some of that. And then I'm at the sorrel, and then, I'm looking over there. I'm like, oh man, I got to like pull this bindweed off of this okra. And then I'm like, oh, the okra flower. There's never been a more beautiful thing on this planet. And then I follow the thing that flew out of the okra flower over to the squash flower. And I'm thinking, oh, it's that, which to me, that kind of digressive, it's a different logic. It's a different logic of being, and it's a logic that feels outside of productivity, outside of the sort of, outside of a kind of, in a way, capitalist logic. Although it might be the case that the garden might produce things that some people might think, I'm going to grow my potatoes, so I don't have to buy potatoes. Yeah. But still, there's a kind of way, the digressiveness, this kind of lyric, thing that it inspires in me. Again, it's not my job, but it inspires in me. Feels very connected to a mode of life that I actually love, and also my writing. But the other thing is that there is the beautiful thing of like the seed itself, the thing that is tiny, that, the size of the tip of a lead pencil, you put it in the ground, and then that thing makes enough, collard greens for, a lot, a plant that is hardy and, manages the cabbage moths and everything else. You get a lot of collards out of that. But then if you let that plant go, it's going to make, 1,000 seeds, 1,000 of those same things. And then those things, boom, can all make 1,000 plants. You can literally make 1,000 collard plants from that. And then all 1,000 of those will make 1,000. So just like that was 2 seasons. We've come into a place of such abundance, such care, such feeding and nourishment. And that was all contained inside of the first seed. So, which is to say that in a garden, you're always sort of in a kind of study and practice of the metaphorical experience, because that things are other things in a garden. Garden always teaches you that. This is that,
Well, I'm glad this is being recorded, because what you've said alone could make another wonderful piece. And there's several comments in the chat talking about how inspiring that was. Thank you. Speaking of time, we've got time for one more question, and one just came through the chat. I do want to go ahead and just forward that one to you. Have you ever thought about a whole book about the gardening experience?
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and it's partly because I never tire of it. I never tire of it. You know, it just stays so like these new delights that I'm writing. Even though I look at the two that are open here, one is called the Sweet Juncture Part 2. The first Sweet Juncture was about the long beans that I'm growing and these ants that they do the same thing that ants do around peony buds. They kind of hang around at the juncture of the long bean and the stem. And it seems to me that they must be getting some kind of sweetness up there. And then the other Sweet Juncture, again in the garden, I'm sort of looking at these butterflies put their tongues into the tithony, or into the zinnias, you know, that bizarre, beautiful teetering they do to get to the nectar. So that's to say, yes, I think it would be a good idea, and it would be fun.
Well, we've just had dropped into the chat a reminder about making a donation to Maryland Humanities for our audience. Please consider that, because it's what has brought us this incredibly moving and very thoughtful discussion with Ross. Ross, thank you so much. It's a delight to meet you. And
Thanks,
that was a great book. I look forward to seeing the sequel.
Thank you very much. Good to talk with you too.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Ross. And I will just add to that you also shouldn't forget that you can donate to your local library. They always need our support. If you follow your local news, it is not always an easy path to maintain the funding of your local library. So I hope that is something you will track as well. I just wanted to take a quick moment here at the end to thank you all for joining us. This was a wonderful, wonderful discussion this morning. I want to thank our co-host, St. Mary's County Library, our local partners, and of course, again, Michael Blackwell and Ross Gay. Be sure to pick up a copy of the Book of Delights essays at your local bookstore or library. And Michael very kindly pointed out that the audiobook is read by Ross. I think after hearing him read today, you may want to reread it by listening to it. And if you could take a few moments to complete our survey to offer feedback, that would be great. You should see a link for it in the chat. And thank you all again, and I will bid you good day. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, everybody.